Hi everybody and welcome to this week's Let's Talk People Development. I'm Luke and I'm here with Danny as always, and today we're talking about the experience illusion. Something that struck us, myself and Danny, delivering together over the last month or so, wasn't it, Danny, whereby we observed something that made us scratch our heads and think, why is that? What is it that we're seeing when it comes to the illusion that can be created by one's experience and therefore perceived capability of doing something? Is that a fair start?
It is a fair start. And I think that it's funny, you talk about that over the last month, and I think you're absolutely right. We spoke about it over the last few weeks more so. But I actually think I've probably been pondering it for decades, for years, because it's that whole bit around what is it that experience does to our way of thinking and how we approach things. And I've never looked at it that way. It's only been the last few weeks I've almost looked at it through a different lens. So I'm really looking forward to the conversation we're going to have about it today.
Yeah, and I guess at a high level, what we observed over the last few weeks, we were both facilitating together in an environment with a brilliant group of people, as we always do, and we were delivering a phase of a program, one that we've delivered for years and years in lots of different organisations, specifically in the art form of sales, and we got to that stage of practicing and looking at the negotiation element of sales. And there's these activities that we run. Sometimes they're brilliantly successful. Sometimes they can get lost in their way. And sometimes it's somewhere in between, right? No right or wrong. That's what development is there for. But what we observed more recently was perhaps in this particular organization, it was a new program and therefore we'd never done it before. But they were new starters. In fact, not just new starters for many of them. They were probably first time into a role, not just sales role, but out of university. So really, really green in a great way. And that was the moment that we saw something in those sort of three negotiation activities that we've run for many, many years that we hadn't seen in a while.
Yeah, it was a freshness towards the approach they took. But it wasn't a freshness as in it lacked quality or substance. In fact, it was the opposite. They did a really great job because they were able to look at it with purely based on the brief. So there's a brief with the activity, and that's kind of all the information that you get. You don't get any other anything else. And it encourages you actually within the brief to stick to what you know from it. But what they didn't then do is to then add to that a load of their own interpretation or their own expectations. And I suppose it was quite weird. It was odd to watch because you kind of go, actually, they've done a really good job from the outset. I think that was what sort of triggered to notice it so much. It was a different approach. But it was an approach that actually seemed to work quite well.
I think what I observed the most is in previous experiences of running it, it's always done well, but it seems more complex. And I thought that's the aha moment for me was that both do it really well, but this time it felt clean. To your point, focused on what was in front of them, focused on the brief, didn't bring in a number of different ways of thinking that actually remove the purity of the activity itself. It was unhinged, it was unhindered, and therefore what we saw was still great outcomes, but it was the route to getting there that was perhaps the most remarkable piece. Most people do get there or get somewhere near there, but it can sometimes be quite painful for sometimes unknown reasons or quite obvious reasons. And I think that was the moment that we went, well, why? Why is that? And we've kind of stumbled upon, well, not stumbled upon, but we discussed throughout the remainder of the afternoon. Is it because of their lack of experience that they were able to come into it very agile, very open-minded, very curious, and they weren't constrained by potentially lots of different negotiation experiences whereby they draw them in and go, well, this might happen or that might happen. A load of hypothetical type situations. They might think this, or they may do this. That might be their approach. They just focused on their own because they didn't have some of that complex knowledge that's valuable, extremely valuable, but they didn't have it in this situation to get in their way.
I think you've absolutely nailed it there, Luke, because I think overcomplicating is often what you see, and I don't mean that in a detrimental way. It's like, people bring loads of like rich ideas and rich thinking, which make it go from quite simple to very complex very quickly. They didn't bring that, therefore it stayed really simple and straightforward because there was no, I've done this before, or actually I've been in this situation, this happened, because there wasn't that. It was almost like there was parts where the conversation was like quite quiet. It was like, oh, well, that's it then. Because there wasn't that sort of layering up that groups would typically do with bringing in the different factors that you describe. So I think that's the first thing for me that really stands out is, and again, let's face it, we're not the first time we talk about this, but that is, how quickly can something become more complicated than it needs to be, and therefore that restricting the speed in which you reach the outcome or the conclusion you're trying to find?
Well, 100%. And I think if we bring it now away from negotiation and sales, which is where we kind of fell upon this subject at the time, let's think about this in the broadest sense of either professional world or personal world. And you say, it's not a new thing for us to talk about making things too complicated. No, it isn't. That's a pretty obvious conversation that people have regularly. But how often do we go, I'm making it more complicated, or I'm not finding ways to make it less complicated through the people that I engage with, the people that I get new ideas from, the people that I surround myself by, the learning that I conduct or take myself on a learning journey, whether it be throughout the year or over a period of time. And I think all we can do is kind of allow people that are listening to this to go, well, what did it teach me? Well, first and foremost, I always look just straight back at myself and go, well, how many times have I done that? How many times have I made the simplest of things deeply complicated and gone right down a rabbit hole of pain that I've caused for myself? And actually, you've got to go right back to the beginning to go, well, actually, I took a sidestep somewhere that was unnecessary.
Well, the rabbit hole concept is brilliant, isn't it? Because, the principle of that you go down this tunnel, and therefore sometimes it all looks the same because it's just this place. And therefore, at what point do you stop and turn around? And often we don't, because we hope that through, we might even feel like a bit, kind of, there's loads of stuff going on, and I might overcomplicate it, but there's light at the end of the tunnel, right? You're hoping for is that there's somewhere in there you're going to see the way through. But what we probably don't do, I certainly don't do, I don't know about other people, but I know I don't do, is stop and ask myself why I'm in the tunnel in the first place. And therefore take a decision to get out of it quickly to maybe see things a bit clearer.
And half the time you'll find yourself in the tunnel with the same people. Why? Because you surround yourself by the same people. And I think, therefore, you surround yourself by the same knowledge. And I think these are some of the principles, therefore, that we're discussing here, is that experience is something that we all seek. Knowledge is something that we all look to grow. And if we were to speak to that group of people about what it is that they so desperately want, and if they could click their fingers and they'd have it, it would be 2 or 3 4 years more experience, if not more than that, so that they could not have to go through some of the pain that they're about to embark on in the earlier parts of their career. So that's therefore me saying this is not to stamp all over the fact that we work really hard to gain the experiences that we do, to go through the highs, the lows, and the somewhere in between, to be able to formulate a way of thinking, grow our knowledge, be more responsive and agile. But at the same time, most importantly, let's not make it an illusion that experience is the be all and end all. Experience could also, if not used to the right, with the right balance, could also hinder you as much as it could benefit you.
That's it. And I think that is where I find this becomes now interesting, right? Because experience is so valuable in life, right? It is, and we rely on it in ourselves a lot. We seek it in others for guidance, support, direction, help, assistance, whatever it may be. It brings value to, like so many different environments and situations. Might be saving money, making things more efficient, making things more effective, all of those things. So there's such a richness of benefit to it. Is that the reason why we sometimes fail to see it being a hindrance to us? Because broadly speaking, you would talk it as a good thing, right? As a positive thing, as a beneficial thing. And therefore the can't see the wood for the trees bit, we're going, hang on a minute, is your experience getting in your way? How can that even be the case? But actually, maybe it could be. Maybe it could be getting in your way.
The benefits of being or thinking more like a beginner is something that you can't just make up. You can't just make happen, but you can try and find ways. This could start to fit into that camp of curiosity, but it's slightly different for me, because actually it is, we can be experienced and be curious that layers upon our curiosity. It's how could you flick a switch or create an environment for yourself whereby you could look at things as black and white as what we saw. You don't complicate things, and you just look through the lens of a beginner at certain situations. Now, not all situations require that, right? That's the first thing you decide. Do I need to think like a beginner, or do I need to think with the experience that I have? And maybe that's the way that you can look at this illusion, is that what is required of me in this given moment. And in fact, if I'm not the best person to think like a beginner, right? And great leaders know that they're definitely not the smartest people in the room. In fact, they should be, imploring those around them to do that maybe some of the smartness that we're looking for is in the purity of the beginner, not necessarily the smartness of who has the most knowledge. Maybe there's an element of who has the least knowledge that can provide me with the purest view and purest lens that I'm looking for.
Imagine that, the ability, right, so technologically speaking, it'd be like having a pair of glasses that you can put on that change how you see the situation, right? And it's metaphorical because we're not actually physically seeing it when we look at a situation, but that's the concept. But how do you, or rather, how could you look at a situation and say, imagine I didn't know anything about this. Imagine I had no knowledge or no experience. How would I see it then? How would I look at this situation then? And therefore, how would that potentially change not just my perspective of the here and now, but ultimately could potentially change the outcome. It could change what the end result is, and therefore, kind of bring things into that perspective. I mean, that in itself, it sounds so simple, doesn't it? Just look at it as if you with a fresh pair of eyes would be a phraseology that somebody would use. I'll come in tomorrow with a fresh outlook. But actually, that's what we're trying to do, right? That's what we're talking about here, isn't it? It's being able to look at it without this kind of history of information or history of knowledge.
Yeah, and then Danny, I just want to say, absolutely, it's the simplest of things to say that, but the reality is very, very different. We observed that. We've observed that in the situation that we discussed at the beginning. It's all well and good saying, look at things through a fresh lens. Be curious. Look for new ways to do things. Surround yourself by those people that, are always, optimistic and looking for new ways of working. That's easier said than done when everybody's really busy and we're stuck in the world of our own version of the rat race and going and going and going. And we will always have team meetings, and we will always have ways in which we can stop and reflect. We've talked about reflection as a great tool, but maybe this is something to add into one of those tools that we talk about is thinking like a beginner or surrounding myself by beginners, because what we observed was the output was cleaner. The output was not hindered by, we can share that we were with some of the leaders there that were observing it, and the leaders in that team had said, we've done something similar before, and it did not end well.
Yeah.
Because actually what got in the way was too much confidence. What got in the way was a little bit of competitive nature, maybe, dare I say, a little bit of personal ego got in the way. All of those things, for the most experienced people in the room observing it, were like, maybe I've got something to learn here. So that's actually why it's a bit harsher than just look through things through a different lens, is be a bit self-critical in this and go, are you part of the challenge? Are you maybe going into certain situations too confident that you're one with all of the answers, not therefore looking? Are you going into it, not ego in a bad way, but confidence can sometimes lean into that I am the right person in the room to do that? Yes, you probably are, but is there an opportunity to stop? Maybe removing some of those blind spots that we can create and we could really not be seeing.
It's funny, isn't it? I'm just thinking about, though we sometimes talk about resilience, and the mechanism of resilience is my thinking helping or hindering me? So, it's a good question to ask yourself, so if you're feeling overwhelmed or under pressure or whatever it may be, you really ask yourself, actually, is my thinking helping the cause, or is it getting in the way of things? And I wonder if that's a similar type of question to this, is we're looking at a situation, almost this, what's steering my thoughts? What's making me think about the things I'm thinking about? What's making me consider the approach or the style? So you talk there about the personal ego, right? So this would look like a bit like, if I'm going at someone, I go, hang on a minute, am I getting quite competitive over something that doesn't need me to be competitive over, for example? So I go, hang on a minute, am I bringing competition to this and therefore it's clouding the best result because I'm trying to win or be first or be the best? Whereas actually, I may not do any of those things because of my intent to do them is creating the wrong level of thinking. And maybe that's part of it as well.
And I think I absolutely agree. And then the close relationship, or the flip side, is probably the better way of saying it, is then the other one is risk. So therefore, the competitive nature versus that caution that we sometimes throw into things. It's one of the hardest things that we all have to kind of battle through, is through experiences we become more cautious. Maybe the knowledge that we have does hinder us in that way too, is that we go into things a little bit more skeptical because of our experiences, a bit more cynical, which is a bit of a harsher word, but we can do, a bit more opinionated, and maybe just a little bit more, what's the word? Just objective in that sense. So no, not objective, because to be objective, you know what I'm trying to say? It's more just about that whole, I'm not going to go into this without not consciously being aware, but I'm not going into this pure. I am either competitive or I'm causing that risk aversion, which can be equally a hindrance.
Completely. And
sorry, by the way, that was I lost my words a little bit there, but but you know what I'm trying to say.
I think, to what you were trying to say, it made sense. And I think the challenge with all of that you describe is it's unconscious often as well, isn't it? You're not actually thinking, oh, I must do these things. It's an unconscious behavior that's causing those things to happen. And therefore, to understand unconscious behavior, you've got to stop and think about that unconscious behavior. For example, I'll go back to my example, is I'm behaving in a certain way. Why am I behaving in that way? I'm feeling angry, frustrated, annoyed, whatever it may be. Why do I feel this way towards this situation? What is it that's causing that? And sometimes that could be outside influences, which you may or may not have control or influence over. But often it's internal influences that are causing us to feel a particular way and therefore behave in a particular way as a result of it. And I think this goes back to this whole concept of, if I'm set a task And I believe that this task is relatively simple and straightforward because I've got a lot of experience of it. Therefore, that's going to change the way I approach the task. And do I get the full benefit of whatever I'm trying to get from it, or the learning opportunity from it?
Yeah, definitely. I think that's the point, isn't it? I think it's just about going. You talked about frustration or towards a certain situation. Is that because of your experience? Is it because you're too experienced that therefore you're being frustrated by X, Y, and Z?
Yeah.
It could well be that you have less patience because what you know that in the thinking towards any given situation, you're frustrated because people are at position A and you're already at Z. So you're frustrated by the fact that I've had all of that experience, but actually your journey from A to Z is absolutely right. In fact, were G and S given to you by somebody else. So that's another thing. You talk about external factors. How much of your experience is your own, or is it that you've got some preconceived ideas about a certain situation that were given to you by a mentor, by a coach, by a peer, by a leader, that therefore you've adopted their experiences, and therefore understanding where those experiences come from are also equally important. If somebody says to you that you trust, I wouldn't touch that system with a barge pole, you could spend your entire career not going anywhere near a system or a tech tool purely because one person that you trust tells you not to. You're never given a chance. And I guess that's experience passed on that may hinder you because you just don't even look at it. You don't even consider it as an option.
I mean, for sure.
So,
yeah. How closing things down because of another person's influence over a situation. I mean, that without a doubt is going to be the case. Sorry, I cut across you then, but you can carry on.
No, you didn't. I think this is the point. It's a really simple subject area. Really, it's a culmination of lots of other things that we've spoken about in the past, from curiosity to don't be limited by your thinking. But that's more around mindset and choice. What we're talking about actually here is something that you have either physically done or learned and chosen to think about over a period of time. Experience is what most new to role, new to industry, new to just work in general, in that working life, is something that people seek in abundance. Give me your experience and therefore I can catch up, which is great. And actually, that's what we all work towards. More experience, more credibility, more growth, more knowledge that allows us to be the best versions of ourselves. But also we should temper that with the fact that experience is also an illusion that it can cast for itself if we only say that I now have experience and therefore I am right in any given situation. Maybe we're not. Maybe our experiences make us wrong in certain situations. Slightly negative, but it's well worth looking at based on what we saw in the purity of these exercises.
Yeah, because what you're trying to do here is to take your what's happening and what's taking place and bring some benefit to that, right? So therefore, it's to stop. It's potentially to stop all the things we've spoken about so far in the last 20 minutes or so, how long it's been, which is, don't go down the rabbit warren. Don't let your preconceived ideas jade your judgment. Don't let the opinions of others cloud your thinking, and so on and so forth. That's what we're stopping rapping. What we're positively trying to enable is to look at it through this different lens. This kind of, let me look at it through this freshness. If I was in that position, there's a guy called Ken Robinson. He's a fantastic author and speaker. Does loads of TED Talks and stuff. He wrote a book called The Element, but he described a moment when he came home from work one day and his daughter was only, 3 or 4 years old, and she was drawing a picture. And he said, what are you drawing a picture of? And she said, God. And he said, and he thought, that's a bit of a, how do I manage that kind of conversation? Because his daughter's clearly drawing fish. He went, well, that's interesting, but nobody really knows what God looks like. And she said, don't worry, Dad, they will when I've finished. That kind of, that freshness of a, of a 4-year-old who goes, who has no preconceptions about how people react to something, therefore will believe everything they do as being the only way forward, the best way forward. And he would say, how do you bring that childlike approach towards things? We're doing the same here, aren't we? How do you bring that newness? Imagine it was your first day on the job, first ever day you walk through the door, how would you tackle this then? Rather than necessarily how you're about to tackle it. To make sure, because don't forget, we're right by this point at the beginning, anyway, that we're not saying experience is bad, right? It has incredible value. So therefore, you look at it and go, in this instance, my experience is the best way forward. But in another situation, actually, I'm going to come at it from a green perspective. That's the best way forward.
To your question earlier on, to wrap this up, James has given us the green light, Danny, that we are over 30 minutes on this one. So to bring all of that and everything that you've just said there, I know, it's flown by, is in any given situation, in any given moment in time, whether it's one-to-one, one-to-many, a day, a week, a month ahead of you, is your experience going to help or hinder you in that given moment? And maybe just another tool for you to just throw into that toolkit of things that you can ask yourself and you can ask others, and you can challenge yourself individually or collectively with other people to go, are we the right people, or do we need to bring a little bit of the benefits of being a beginner type thinking to this situation?
Yeah, I'm going to take, I really am going to take this forward, because I know that I am definitely someone that falls into this trap a lot. I know that as me as a human being falls into this trap a lot, and therefore I'm going to take it forward. I'm going to see it a bit like, often in our learning world, we'll talk about fixed and growth mindset. I'm going to see it as an experienced or beginner mindset. So nice. When I'm applying, when I'm bringing at something, that kind of, right, what am I bringing? And make sure I look through both of those two perspectives, certainly to situations that require the quality of thought that this is going to bring. So I'm definitely going to try that and see where that takes me.
I think that's a great way to end it, Danny. I really do. Fixed growth mindset, for anybody listening that's from our world, will have heard that for years. It's similar, but there is a difference to this. I think it's so important. And I think that's exactly where we end it. So for all of you, is it that you need to bring an experienced or a beginner type mindset to any given situation? That's it from us, Danny. Another episode in the bag in 2025. Loved it as always. And for all of those of you listening, thank you. And we will be coming to you in February with some exciting episodes and a very, very special guest. We'll see you very soon.
Looking forward to that. Thanks, Steve.